1975, Robert De Niro had exceeded all expectations. The 31-year-old actor's work in The Godfather Part 2 had won him an Oscar. So why would America's hottest young actor have to get a second job?
Try and imagine it's the mid-70s, you're in New York, you hail a cab, you get in the cab. In the front seat driving the cab is Oscar winner Robert De Niro.
It's a great New York story because apparently an actor hailed a cab, pulls up, it's Robert De Niro driving his cab, and the guy's a little puzzled.
You know, they're like, oh, Rob, so I see your last movie didn't turn out that well.
De Niro says, oh, I'm researching a role. And of course, this guy, in typical New York fashion, is like, yeah, right. And he goes, we've all been there. And he tips him, not believing for a second that this guy's actually researching a role. He thinks he's actually hit rock bottom.
The role De Niro had landed was Travis Bickle in Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. For his second collaboration with Scorsese, the consummate method actor immersed himself in the character, actually getting a hack license and pulling shifts behind the wheel.
It's about a cab driver who basically lives in his own head, and he's a war vet, and it's just he gets more disturbed and he becomes obsessed with wanting to kill a political candidate. And he also becomes obsessed with a young prostitute played by a teenage Jodie Foster.
Taxi Driver was inspired by the true story of Arthur Bremer, who'd attempted to kill presidential candidate George Wallace in 1972. De Niro did all he could to delve into the sociopath's dangerous mind.
The screenwriter, Paul Schrader, would read aloud the diaries of Arthur Bremer in order to get into the mindset of someone who was sort of deranged.
De Niro would sit around and listen to this stuff read aloud and soak it in.
He was so intense in this film that there's parts of it where you just think, this isn't a guy acting. They actually found someone in New York City who drives a cab who is on the verge of crazy.
Even on the set, De Niro's commitment to the role was unsettling for some of his co-stars.
Sybil Shepherd has said when they were making Taxi Driver, he came on like a steamroller, and she just found him to be such a overbearing presence. Even when they were waiting to start their scenes, she couldn't even be in the same room. I mean, she had to get herself, you know, way far away.
When Taxi Driver premiered at the 1976 Cannes Film Festival, it was awarded the top prize, the Golden Palm. It also earned De Niro his second Oscar nomination. But most moviegoers remember Taxi Driver for 4 words that didn't even appear in the script.
You talking to me?
You talking to me?
Are you talking to me?
You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking? You talking to me?
In the script, it said something like, Travis Bickle just looks at himself in the mirror, and that was it. And then they kind of built off of that. There's 2 sort of versions of the story. One was that he was using an old method actor technique, which was to repeat a line over and over with different inflections to kind of get it right. The other story was that Martin Scorsese was actually recording the sound for that scene. He had the boom mic in the headset, and there was so much background noise that he didn't think he was getting the dialogue, so he kept having De Niro repeat it just to make sure, and he intended to cut between the lines, but when he actually saw it put together, he thought, wow, this actually kind of works.
Taxi Driver cemented the creative and personal relationship between Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese.
There was a connection between Scorsese and De Niro that is as great as any partnership in cinema.
Good friends. It was like a marriage made in heaven.
In the late 70s, De Niro split off from Scorsese for Deer Hunter and landed his 3rd Oscar nomination. But Robert returned to Marty in 1978 with an unusual new project.
De Niro had given him a book on Jake LaMotta and said, you know, this is a movie we really should do. At the time, Scorsese, he didn't see a story. He didn't understand why would we make this movie, and De Niro over time really convinced him, showing that De Niro not only as an actor was involved, but also spotting things and as a producer. So in a way, De Niro helped create possibly what's known as the best movie of the 80s.
Raging Bull is the story of Jake LaMotta, who was a prize fighter back in the 40s and 50s. It's a story of the demise of a man, of his own craziness inside of his own head.
After De Niro's disturbing turn in Taxi Driver, his new co-stars were apprehensive.
I had seen Taxi Driver. I thought he was insane. I was like, oh my goodness, he scared me. But when I got the part, he always gave me a sense of security, a sense of confidence. He always made sure I was okay.
But that sense of security was tested when cameras started rolling in April 1979.
Doing a scene with him, and he's talking to me.
What's the matter?
And he turned around, and I should have known when I saw the shoulder drop. I wasn't paying attention to it because I was trained to stay in character the whole time. Well, he hit me so hard that I think my head hit the wall. I wasn't expecting it.
Hey, you hear what I said? You don't ever have any disrespect for me. You hear what I said? You hear what I said?
Yeah.
All right, go in there.
And boy, you snapped right back in. If you were anywhere drifting at that point, you snapped back in. But then after, are you okay? You're fine? Everything's fine? I just will never forget the look in his eyes. The fear I had at that given moment, I didn't know who this man was. This was Jake LaMotta, and I didn't know what this guy was capable of.
This time, the method actor took his method to new extremes when he tested the limits of his own body.
The boxing scenes in Raging Bull, you see the blood, you see the sweat, you see things just flying, punches landing. He definitely trained physically to play that role.
He had a boxer's physique. He was in perfect shape.
We did the fight scenes first, and if you took a ride home with him, he'd get out halfway and run the rest. I mean, he was just so dedicated.
As his character declined, De Niro underwent an equally startling transformation.
He ultimately gained 60 pounds to play the older, fat Jake LaMotta.
They shut down filming of Raging Bull so that De Niro could gain all this weight.
He was literally getting sick from food. In the beginning, yeah, it's like, oh, great, let's have a bowl of pasta. But when you have to have something, you know, I mean, that third milkshake, I don't think was going down so smooth.
When Raging Bull hit theaters in December 1980, it was roundly praised by critics. The film landed 8 Academy Award nominations, including a 4th for De Niro. But as Robert's career flourished, his all-consuming form of acting reportedly became a burden on his 3-year marriage to Diane Abbott.
One of the strains on the relationship was that De Niro is a method actor. If a method actor is playing someone like Jake LaMotta, he becomes Jake LaMotta 3-4 weeks before the filming begins.
When he goes to sleep, he gets up in the morning, he keeps that character. He don't let go of that. A lot of times I used to talk to him on the phone, hey, Bob, who are you today? One day he's Raging Bull, another day he's the Godfather. It's hard to shake characters.
Diane Abbott may be waiting at home for this wonderful man, Robert De Niro, but if Robert De Niro is playing a very bad character in one of his films, he cannot simply put it aside. He takes the character home with him. And that's the character, whether it's Diane Abbott, whether it's one of his close friends, they have to deal with this character. And it can be very, very straining.
In 1979, De Niro and Abbott separated. They would officially divorce 9 years later. With his celebrity rising as the 80s dawned, Robert De Niro would find his name in the news for reasons other than acting. By 1981, Robert De Niro's work in films like The Godfather 2 and The Deer Hunter had established him as one of the most gifted actors of his generation. But he'd also gained a reputation for fiercely protecting his private life.
He is about the most guarded human being on the planet.
I have seen De Niro being interviewed, and it's amazing what a wall he puts up. He's not one of those people who's willing to tell you everything or even anything.
Sometimes he won't even give you a spoken answer. He'll just sort of go, you know, like that. And you sort of have to intuit that he means yes, you know, or maybe no, you're not sure.
And I can never figure out if it's because he just can't articulate his process or if he just doesn't want to, because he doesn't want to, you know, shatter down the walls of mystery and become a public figure that everyone knows everything about.
He's been labeled introverted and, you know, whatever, but he's as normal as everybody else. And perhaps maybe he just doesn't have anything to say to you. And sometimes I don't talk either. I just have nothing to say to you. And I learned that from him.
But the media spotlight was about to shine on the intensely private actor. Raging Bull, his 4th collaboration with director Martin Scorsese, had earned De Niro his 4th Oscar nomination. The award ceremony was scheduled for March 30th, 1981. But the Oscars were eclipsed by a shocking event.
Mr. President!
Outside Outside the Hilton Hotel in Washington, President Ronald Reagan was shot by a mentally disturbed 25-year-old loner named John Hinckley.
So the Academy Awards were supposed to take place that day, and they postponed it because of President Reagan being shot.
The ceremony was rescheduled for the following day. As De Niro traveled to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, he had no idea his Oscar bid and the nation's biggest headline were about to collide.
De Niro shows up at the Academy Awards and he doesn't realize that his driver and the guys who are following him around are FBI.
John Hinckley Jr. was a guy who seemed to be very influenced by Hollywood and Hollywood movies, and he actually felt a kinship with De Niro's character, Travis Bickle, from Taxi Driver.
There was kind of a weird, chilling parallel in Taxi Driver where De Niro was reading the diaries of Arthur Bremer, who was an attempted political assassin, and then the movie ended up sort of inspiring another political assassin named John Hinckley Jr.
John Hinckley, who ended up being one of the biggest fans of the movie, watched it several times and got so obsessed with Jodie Foster and arguably inspired by the violence of the film, decided that he would shoot the president, that would be his way of demonstrating his true love for Jodie Foster.
But that night, De Niro didn't yet realize the connection between Taxi Driver and Hinckley.
Right after he was up on the podium collecting his Oscar for Raging Bull, and someone says, hey, what do you think about Hinckley being inspired by Taxi Driver to assassinate Reagan? And he tried to answer the question, and he just dropped the microphone and he walked away.
But it wouldn't be the last time De Niro would find himself an unwilling subject of media attention. In 1982, his personal life made the news following a Hollywood tragedy.
John Belushi and Robert De Niro were friends because there was a time in De Niro's career where he was shuttling between New York and LA, and he had kind of a temporary residence at the Chateau Marmont. While he was living there, he used to see Belushi and they used to hang out.
The friendship comes about because they are the two great talents on film at that time. One, the great serious method actor, one, the great comic actor, and their friendship was out of mutual respect.
In the early hours of the morning on March 5th, 1982, De Niro saw Belushi at an LA nightclub. They made arrangements to meet later at the Chateau Marmont. But when Robert arrived at Belushi's room, he had an unpleasant surprise.
There was this woman, Kathy Smith, there. De Niro did not want to be around her. He knew her as a person who kept shady friends, and he didn't want to be a part of that. So when he saw John Belushi hanging out with Kathy Smith, he left.
De Niro later tried to find where John was, and his calls were going unanswered.
Later that day, De Niro and the rest of the world learned the news. Robert's friend John Belushi was dead.
He OD'd on drugs and passed away. I think he was only 33 years old.
But it wasn't just a personal loss. It also dragged De Niro into one of the seediest Hollywood scandals of the decade.
Kathy Smith, after John Belushi dies, takes off and goes to Canada. She was extradited, though, by authorities in America who brought her back.
Kathy Smith granted an interview to the National Enquirer. She was quoted as saying that De Niro visited Belushi in the early morning hours on the day that Belushi died.
Police wanted to talk to Robert De Niro, but he was overseas in Italy filming a movie. So instead, what he did was he phoned in a testimony to the grand jury.
It's hard for us to imagine because now it seems like celebrities, they thrive on scandal. But for De Niro, I feel like that's that line he doesn't want to cross. And regardless of the fact that he just lost someone who was a friend of his, which is hard enough, but to be pulled into this sort of very seedy story about drugs and all this stuff, I could see for someone like that who is so intensely private that would really bother him.
The unwanted public attention didn't prevent De Niro's career from flourishing. During the late 80s and early 90s, he earned Academy Award nominations for Awakenings and Cape Fear. But when his career began to flag, De Niro would have to take on the most unexpected role of his life.